By now, you've no doubt heard about the latest Polymarket scandal.
We're learning that a special forces soldier has been charged for making more than $400,000 by betting on whether or not Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro would be removed from office. And here's the thing. According to the indictment, the officer participated in the planning and execution of the operation and used that classified information to allegedly profit.
But have you heard Trump's response to this scandal?
The whole world, unfortunately, has become somewhat of a casino. And you look at what's going on all over the world, in Europe and every place they're doing these betting things. I was never much in favor of it. I don't like it conceptually, but it is what it is.
It is what it is. But what is it exactly? Don't worry if you're new to this Polymarket thing. Today on the Corbett Report, I'm going to explain to you what Polymarket is, how it functions, and where this insidious idea came from. And then I'm going to explain to you how it can be used in the next generation of predictive programming false flag events. Are you ready? Let's go.
You're listening to the Corbett Report. CorbettReport.com.
Welcome back, friends. Welcome back to another edition of the Corbett Report. I'm your host, James Corbett of CorbettReport.com, coming to you, as always, from the sunny climes of Western Japan here in April of 2026 with episode 500 of the Corbett Report podcast, What No One is Saying About Polymarket. Now, I would ask, have you heard the latest story about Polymarket? But you could well respond by saying, which story? Because yes, in case you haven't noticed, Polymarket is all over the news these days. First and foremost, there is that story of U.S. Special Forces officer Master Sergeant Gannon Ken Van Dyke, who was caught up in a scandal pocketing a cool 400 Gs from his own insider information about the raid on Maduro.
At the center of this case is Master Sergeant Gannon Ken Van Dyke. He's based in North Carolina, and prosecutors allege that he placed a bet on the top secret raid literally hours before the president announced it. In total, he placed about 13 bets that were all related to Maduro and Venezuela, wagering $33,000 in total, and he netted more than $400,000. Now, according to the indictment, the soldier also tried to cover up his tracks. Just 3 days after Maduro's capture, Van Dyke asked Polymarket, which was the prediction market that he betted on, to delete his account. And then prosecutors actually say that he tried to switch the email that was associated with his profile.
But that isn't the only news story about Polymarket that's making its way through the news wires lately. For example, you might have seen this story from the Times of Israel. Israeli Air Force major charged with using classified info to place bets on Polymarket, which notes an Israeli Air Force reservist is suspected of having used classified information to place bets on the Polymarket prediction site relating to Israel's war with Iran last year. A Tel Aviv court revealed on Thursday, talking about the so-called 12-day war in June 2025 and the suspicion that this Air Force reservist used his insider classified information to bet on the timing of that war. But it's not just about military operations. It's about, well, everything you can imagine. For example, there's this Bloomberg story that came out recently. France probes weather data tampering after surge in Polymarket bets, which notes that France's forecasting office flagged suspected tampering with weather sensors at the country's largest airport and referred the case to police, talking about automated temperature readings taken at Météo France's weather station at Charles de Gaulle International Airport spiked 4 degrees Celsius and 5 degrees Celsius unexpectedly in the evenings of April 6th and April 15th, respectively, reaching the highest temperature recorded at the site on those days, data from the installation show. Readings from the site are important for the safe operation of the airport, and they are also used to settle contracts for daily high temperatures on Polymarket, according to information on the website where traders place bets on real-world outcomes. And here is the meat and potatoes. So looking at that anomalous spike, the highest spike in temperatures ever recorded on that date in that location, prediction market traders and independent meteorologists in a French weather discussion forum flagged the data irregularities and questioned the results of the contracts, which attracted roughly $1.4 million in combined bets, according to Polymarket data. Total betting for each was more than double the typical volume for other daily Paris temperature contracts in April. Okay, that's a fascinating story in and of itself, and talks about a number of stories that I think are important to the concerned audience everywhere, and certainly members of the Corbett Report. For example, people who are interested in the tampering with temperature data, but also, of course, what it tells us about inside information and trading, and how trading can be manipulated, and the results of those trades can be manipulated, and things to look out for with regard to this. For example, an unusual spike in activity on a particular option or stock or bet right before a completely anomalous reading or event occurs in that space. If that sounds familiar, ding, 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 you've been paying attention to, for example, the 9/11 inside information advanced trading that clearly, demonstrably took place around the events of September 11th, 2001. And you will know all about that if, for example, you have read Reportage, Essays on the New World Order, in which, of course, I have an entire essay about the 9/11 insider trading. To be sure, insider trading almost certainly did transpire in the weeks before 9/11. Although some have pointed to the Commission report's no conceivable ties to Al-Qaeda line as proof that the theory of investor foreknowledge has been successfully debunked, the intervening years have seen the release of not one, not two, but 3 separate scientific papers establishing the statistical likelihood that advanced knowledge was the reason for the anomalous trading leading up to the attacks. In Unusual Option Market Activity and the Terrorist Attacks of September 11, 2001, University of Chicago professor Alan Podeshman concluded, quote, "Examination of the option trading leading up to September 11 reveals that there was an unusually high level of put buying. This finding is consistent with informed investors having traded options in advance of the attacks." End quote. In Detecting Abnormal Trading Activities in Option Markets, researchers at the University of Zurich used econometric methods to confirm unusual put option activity on the stocks of key airlines, banks, and reinsurers in the weeks prior to 9/11. And in Was There Abnormal Trading in the S&P 500 Index Options Prior to the September 11 Attacks, a team of researchers concluded that abnormal activity in the S&P 500 Index Options market around the time of the attack, quote, is consistent with insiders anticipating the 9/11 attacks. End quote. That leaves us with 2 key questions. Who was profiting from these trades, and why was no one ever indicted for participating in them? Now, hopefully you are familiar with the story of the 9/11 terror trade, but if not, I have an essay for you. It's called The 9/11 Terror Trade, and it is contained in my collection of essays, Reportage, Essays on the New World Order, available in paperback and hardcover and audiobook and ebook at reportagebook.com and wherever fine books are sold, until they're not. But yes, suffice it to say, there is a lengthy and voluminous history of inside information being used in the past to profit through inside trading and trading on advanced knowledge of various events. And of course, that predates 9/11. It postdates 9/11. But that is just one obvious example that should, I assume, be familiar to most Corbett Report listeners. But now, well, inside advanced information trading comes with a new technological twist. It's called Polymarket. And yes, you have probably heard of Polymarket by now, but do you know what it is and how it functions? Well, if not, I have a handy-dandy explainer for you. It is called How to Make a Fortune on Regime Change. It's an editorial that I wrote earlier this year, specifically in January of this year. And it is, of course, available up on CorbettReport.com. And like all my editorials, it's also available up on my Substack. And when and if you go and read through it, you'll find this information about Polymarket and how it works. I write, if you drill down on Polymarket's documentation, you can learn how this all works. Specifically, On Polymarket, you can buy and sell shares representing future event outcomes. For example, will TikTok be banned in the US this year? Shares in event outcomes are always priced between 0 and 1 USDC. That is the Ethereum-based stablecoin that's supposedly backed by actual US dollar reserves. And every pair of event outcomes, for example, each pair of yes and no shares, is fully collateralized by 1 USDC. Shares are created when opposing sides come to an agreement on odds such that the sum of what each side is willing to pay is equal to $1. Okay, that might make perfect sense to people who are familiar with these types of prediction markets. That might make no sense to people who are not. So perhaps the best way to get your handle on it is to look at an actual specific example. For example, will Jesus Christ return before 2027? And if you go to polymarket.com, you can place your bet on this particular outcome. Interestingly, it seems to have stabilized at a certain rate. I guess there is about a 4% chance that Jesus is going to return, according to the collective wisdom of the Polymarket users. And so, again, we can visually see how this works. If you're watching the video version of this podcast, you can see that the yes bet is currently 3.9 cents and the no bet is 96.2 cents. So what that means is, let's say that you make a $100 bet on this particular event. Will Jesus Christ return before 2027? And you say yes. And if Jesus Christ returns before 2027, then the yes side will get paid out. And if it is at this 3.9 cent when the market is finally resolved and it pays out, then that means in your $100 bet, you're going to receive the $96.20 that represents the share of the other side. That is what the market looks like. And if you are so inclined, you can go through and start signing up and setting up your account and getting involved and playing with the markets as you will. But I have some reservations about such activity that I'll get into later in this episode. Anyway, as I go on to say, well, how is it resolved? I mean, I suppose, will Jesus Christ return before 2027? I'd like to think that most people would be aware of that fact if it did resolve and yes, Jesus Christ did return, or if he did not return. I suppose there could be some room for dispute, which actually leads to the question, how are these markets resolved? Who decides what the outcome of some of these bets actually is? Well, when the market is resolved, that is when UMA Optimistic Oracle, a smart contract-based optimistic oracle, decides that there is a determinative outcome to the event being gambled on, the winnings are paid out in USDC, the Ethereum stablecoin supposedly backed by US dollars. And yes, if you click through on that, you're going to find a link to an article explaining what UMA Oracle is, which, to cut to the chase, says that UMA, short for Universal Market Access, is an optimistic oracle built by Risk Labs. It lets smart contracts request and receive off-chain data by verifying real-world outcomes through a request, propose, dispute cycle. It's called optimistic because statements are assumed valid unless challenged. Okay, so if somebody says something, well, it has to be challenged. Otherwise, it will just be assumed to be true. And UMA uses the Schelling point principle. Independent voters are motivated to report the truth because they expect others to do the same. It operates on the golden rule, guys. What could possibly go wrong? All right, so that, again, there's a lot to dive into with regards to that. But let's move on to some of the interesting connections behind this Polymarket idea and where it comes from. As I go on to write, what's more, Polymarket likes to brag that the counterparty to each trade is another Polymarket user, meaning that shares can be sold before the market is resolved, and that unlike sportsbooks, there's no house to ban you for winning too much. And why would the house ban you for winning too much? Because perhaps you're cheating in some way, right? Well, this all sounds completely above board and legitimate. What could possibly go wrong? Oh, that's right. Peter Thiel. Yes, as it turns out, Peter Thiel's Founders Fund helped lead a $200 million funding round for Polymarket last June. And as I go on to explain, if you don't know why that is something to be concerned about, then you don't know about the strange story of Peter Thiel or Antichrist or Armageddon or the Ian Davis exposes the technocratic dark state conversation or other things that I've done on Thiel and his connections in the past. But it gets even worse. Yes. As I write here, Polymarket added Donald Trump Jr. as an advisor last August after his 1789 Capital VC fund made a sizable investment in the company. So not only is Polymarket backed by Peter Thiel, and that blood-drinking vampire, but also by Donald Trump Jr. So yes, you would literally have the president's son invested in this Polymarket that is now being used to bet on various world events based on inside information that could come from, I don't know, maybe the president or people around him. Interesting. So I think you're starting to get a sense of why this might not be a good idea. And there are even more layers to that, because although there are some very obvious reasons why this might be a bad idea, there are some less obvious ones that we're going to get into. But let's start by committing the genetic fallacy and asking, where does this idea, this Polymarket idea, come from? Because as you may or may not be surprised to learn, it did not spring fully formed from the head of Peter Thiel or Donald Trump Jr. No, this idea goes back at least a couple of decades, and it has a surprising origin. Oh, wait, it's not surprising at all. It's DARPA. It comes from DARPA.
In 3 days, there will become operative on the internet, stemming from the site of DARPA in the Department of Defense, something called the futures market. It's a futures market to predict future events in the Middle East. And the basis of it is apparently the Department of Defense believes, as they say when you'll read this when you go to the website, they believe that having the market system, people in the market system, betting or buying and selling futures contracts, they will be able to develop information about what might or might not happen in the Middle East in the future. So they're going to develop a program, and that program will buy and sell with individual investors futures contracts on a wide range of issues. And this is effectively a plan to bet on what might or might not happen in the Middle East. This betting parlor on the internet will include wagers, for example, as the examples on the internet site put up by the Department of Defense would include, will Mr. Arafat be assassinated? Will there be missile attacks from North Korea? Will the King of Jordan be overthrown, just as an example? And it will become effectively an internet casino so that individual investors can make bets on future events in the Middle East, and those predictive bets will then give intelligence, presumably, to the Department of Defense.
Yes, DARPA, the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency. And to my long-term listeners, I think it will come as no surprise that this idea has its genesis in DARPA, but there are always new people tuning into the Corbett Report, so if you are unfamiliar with DARPA and the crazy and Orwellian and totalitarian ideas that it has been involved in over the years, I would highly suggest you check out Corbett Report Radio episode 265 on DARPA Exposed, where I go through the history of that organization and some of the crazy things and schemes that it has been a part of over the years. But yes, DARPA. And for those who do not know, that was a press conference that was delivered by Senators Ron Wyden and Byron Dorgan back in July of 2003, when they were first announcing to the public the existence of this policy analysis market that DARPA was putting together, and pointing out some of the reasons why it might be a bad idea, which should be, I think, I'm going to go out on a limb and say, fairly intuitive. I think at the very least, everyone shares the ick factor about an idea like this, literally betting on deaths, assassinations, bombings, regime change, war, etc., bloodshed and violence of various sorts. There is an inherent ick factor to that. And we don't have to go too much on a speculative limb to say that, because as one result of that press conference that we were just watching that clip from, that very same day, the policy analysis market was discontinued. The program was scrapped. And shortly thereafter, the then head of DARPA, Admiral Poindexter, yes, the same Iran-Contra criminal Poindexter, who also has a part to play in the story of the creation of Palantir, Poindexter was forced to resign his position as head of DARPA as a result of that scandal. So yes, I think people were generally feeling that ick that was, again, articulated by Drogan and Wyden in that press conference.
I think this is unbelievably stupid. It's not only, it is, well, that is a gentle thing to say about a program that is so devoid of value. It combines the worst of all of our instincts, in my judgment. It is a tragic waste of taxpayers' money. It will be offensive to almost everyone. Can you imagine if another country set up a betting parlor so that people could go in, and it's sponsored by the government itself, people could go in and bet on the assassination of an American political figure or the overthrow of this institution or that institution? It is terribly wasteful in terms of wasting money. It is offensive.
Yes. Stupid, offensive, a waste of taxpayer money, all of the above and more. But as I say, I think that fundamental ick factor that comes along with the idea of literally placing bets on real world events of violence and bloodshed is just inherently distasteful to the average person. And that doesn't need much explanation. But of course, the idea of prediction markets, there are a number of layers to this onion, and this is the Corbett Report. We don't stop at the outside layer, just that ick feeling that people get from this. No, let's dive a little bit deeper. And to their credit, I think Wyden and Drogan also articulated the next layer of this onion in their press conference when they pointed out another very bad thing that can happen with these types of prediction markets, which is that they, by their very nature, actually monetarily incentivize terrorists to go out and commit spectacular acts of terrorism.
The Policy Analysis Market website, and this is an important point, says that all you have to do to become a trader is to create a username and put your money down. So it seems that terrorists even may be able to be protected as they play. The website assures bettors that DARPA is not going to have access to their identities or their funds. So we don't know the details. Maybe somebody else is going to get it, but it's not evident here. So the question is, why wouldn't terrorists just hop online and start betting if they could either mislead American authorities about their plans or make money to fund more al-Qaeda operations?
Yes, why wouldn't terrorists hop online and start betting on their terror attacks? Good question, but it does lead to a further question. Who are the terrorists? Because although Senator Wyden is pointing the finger at those dastardly turban-wearing, beard-sporting boogeymen in al-Qaeda, well, I think the Corbett reporters in the crowd and others in the conspiracy reality community will be better situated to understand that, well, we should also be concerned about the al-Qaeda terrorists and the money that they could be making betting on their own spectacular terror events of various sorts. But just to concentrate on the financial motivation that terrorists would have in betting on events that they were involved in, or servicemen, another type of terrorist, betting on the things that they've learned from their classified briefings, etc. It's not just a passive activity. So let's go down another layer of the onion, because again, not only are the terrorists and U.S. servicemen, but I repeat myself, incentivized to bet on things that they know about, things that they've heard about, information that they have learned, they are incentivized to make spectacular and unexpected events happen. And we saw a relatively benign version of that earlier in this episode with that weather data tampering at the Charles de Gaulle airport. Okay, so it seems, and nothing has been proven yet in a court of law, but it seems that some person or persons have engaged in some sort of conspiracy to manipulate the temperature data at Charles de Gaulle airport because they could then place a bet on a sudden, anomalous, record-breaking spike in temperature at that particular airport that, lo and behold, wow, it took place, and here's the data to prove it. So think about what happened in that instance. This isn't people just passively learning about some sort of event that was going to happen. They didn't just find out there was going to be some sort of anomalous event, spike in temperatures at Charles de Gaulle airport next week. No, they went out and made that happen specifically to make money from it. And in the event of weather data tampering at a single airport for a single day, perhaps it isn't the end of the world, but it doesn't take much imagination to see how this could be used in, well, world-ending scenarios. For example, we have this from Wall Street Journal recently. Polymarket removes betting market on nuclear detonation. So once again, you can read the details of this story and the market that did spring into existence and was being actively bet on with something like $250,000 of bets already in place before the market was shut down, betting on the likelihood of nuclear detonation as, of course, things start to ramp up between the US and Israel and Iran. Obviously, the threat of nuclear annihilation is growing. But again, think about the added danger of having a Polymarket or Kalshi or one of these other prediction markets in place to literally incentivize such an event to happen. Because the surprising and the most catastrophic outcome will always be the one that is on the winning side of such bets. It is, of course, extremely unlikely that such and such an event like a nuclear detonation will take place in June, unless, and when it does happen, you will win a lot of money, especially if you were in a position to make such a thing happen. Like, I don't know, if you're Donald Trump Jr. and your father is the president of the United States sitting there with the nuclear football, there might be some conflict of interest here and maybe some actual incentivization to make such an event happen that otherwise would not. That is one of the reasons that we should be very concerned about these prediction markets and where they're going. But wait, it gets even worse. Yes, let's go down to another layer of this onion, because although I think a lot of people have caught on to the idea that prediction markets are bad for a number of reasons, not only the ick factor of betting on death, not only the incentivization of literally the monetary reward for people using their inside information to bet on death, but actually to incentivize people to commit spectacular acts of terrorism and violence in order to profit from them. But it's also even worse. And we can get an inkling of that from an article like this one from Fortune. Kalshi and Polymarket are racing to ban insider trading. The economist who built the theory behind prediction markets says it's the whole point. Yes, this whole thing is to yield insider trading, advanced knowledge trading. Why is that? Well, if you read on into this article, you'll find that under mounting pressure, Kalshi and Polymarket have rolled out new restrictions barring politicians from trading on their own campaigns, athletes from trading in their own leagues, and employees from trading on contracts tied to their employers. But Robin Hanson, who's been making the intellectual case for prediction markets for nearly 40 years, says this is all wrong. You want them trading. Hanson, a professor at George Mason University who helped develop the market scoring rule used by many prediction markets, said of insiders, you want the most accurate prices. That's pretty clear. The purpose of the market is to inform decisions. End quote. Well, I hope you understand what this Robin Hanson is saying there. I hope you understand the significance of this. Yes, the point of these prediction markets is to signal information about coming events. That's what these are for. In fact, that was explicitly, if you go back and read the policy analysis market materials and documents that I have linked up in my How to Make a Fortune on Regime Change editorial, you'll find that was specifically what DARPA, the reason why DARPA, or at least the ostensible reason why DARPA was putting the PAM, the policy analysis market, into place in the first place. It was so that their policy analysts could look at the markets and the way they were trading and have a more informed perspective on the likelihood of such and such an event, because they would be able to see all the market participants who are placing bets. Yes, that's one way to look at it, but signaling information. That is what the market is doing. It is signaling information, and it's specifically, as Robin Hanson says, it's designed so that insiders with inside information can signal their advanced knowledge through the market, through the betting mechanism. And when you see a sudden run up in prices or situated around a certain event, you will know, oh, okay, so there's something in the offing there, and there's some plan out there that people are working on. That is the point of such a market. But the next layer of the onion is once you realize that, and once people start looking at that, then of course, as DARPA was talking about in their original policy and analysis market documents, and as the people talking about Polymarket and Kalshi and these other prediction markets are noting, yes, the point is to start using this as a tool for more accurately understanding and predicting future events so that we can see where things are going. But once people start doing that, and they start noticing, oh, okay, oh, there's a look at this market that just came up on whatever the case may be, a nuclear detonation on June 25th or whatever the case is. Oh, okay. So now we know there's some sort of plot. Somebody's got some idea. There's something going on. And of course, the fairy tale version of this is the government loves and cares about you and is watching over you. So DARPA or whoever else are keeping their eye on such things so that they can find out about these devious plots as they're taking place. Imagine if they were doing this, say, prior to 9/11, and they noticed the unprecedented, unusual activity in the options markets pre 9/11 and put two and two together and realized, oh, there's some sort of attack in the offing. Now, of course, in conspiracy reality, we know that these government agencies are not there to swaddle you in their loving arms and protect you from cradle to grave. They are there to, at the very best, use you and fleece you as the tax-paying tax cattle, but more realistically, to put you into the maws of the technocratic enslavement state and to either keep you there forever or depopulate you or turn you into a transhuman nightmare. Anyway, on that positive note, yes, so we should not be relying on, oh, well, government agencies will use these prediction markets to better head off security threats before they come to pass. No, of course, that's not what it's for. But it does raise another interesting point, and that is that we know that the conspirators involved in this conspiracy reality are not solely, perhaps not even primarily, motivated by monetary concerns, as anyone worth their salt knows. The banksters, etc., literally print the money out of thin air, as it is sometimes portrayed. The money itself is not what is important. What is important is the power that comes from having the possession of that economic monetary resource and the power that can be wielded with that. And so, if you could spend a bunch of money to, for example, give out some misinformation that will then be picked up by people who are looking at predictions markets, wouldn't you do so? And yes, so we've arrived at the bottom layer of this onion, which is that eventually, once people have been habituated to this idea, which is, as you see, is now spilling out in all of the mainstream news feeds, everybody's talking about, for example, this U.S. Special Forces officer who was apparently betting on insider information. Once that becomes part of the cultural conversation, once people understand what is happening, more people will start looking to these prediction markets to see what is coming. And in that context, it becomes a lot easier to mislead people, misinform people, send people down rabbit trails to nowhere with a well-placed bet and a bit of maybe mainstream alternative attention on a particular bet. People can be looking this way where the real action is happening the other way. So what am I talking about? Well, again, we don't have to use our imagination too deeply here to understand how this could be used. I mean, on the geopolitical level, for example, the military planners of the war machine could ramp up sudden speculation about Chinese invasion of Taiwan or something along those lines and get everyone to focus on that. Meanwhile, they're planning the next stage of their Ukraine-Russia operation or something along those lines. So there's that sort of grand geopolitical strategy, but it could be something that's specifically designed to target the conspiracy realists in the crowd who know about these types of things, know about, for example, the story of the 9/11 terror trade, and know, well, we can use these prediction markets to see what the next false flag might be. And there, they, of course, could use that as a signal that will keep people chasing down the wrong rabbit trail to nowhere. And if people don't understand how that works, you might remember Operation Blackjack that floated around the independent alternative media 15 years ago or so. If you don't remember that, I'll throw in a link that will help explain that story to you. But yes, oh my God, there's going to be a terror attack, and it's going to be a nuclear terror attack. And we know that it's a nuclear false flag terror attack specifically. We know this because it's in a cartoon that's being published in a newspaper. What? Anyway, that was apparently what it took 15 years ago to send lots of people down a false rabbit trail to nowhere. That got them frothing at the mouth and looking like crazies to the people who are still credulous and trusting of the establishment media. But how much more effective will it be when suddenly, oh my God, did you see the new Polymarket bet on a nuclear explosion on such and such a date, or the assassination of Trump or something like that on such and such a date? Oh, well, now we know what's happening, and we can delve into that. It's QAnon on steroids at that point. So not only can Polymarket be used, obviously, to monetarily benefit terrorists of various sorts, but it can also be used to signal false information and lead people down false paths. So there's a lot of reasons why you should be very, very skeptical about this whole Polymarket idea and where it's going and what is happening as a result of it. But having said that, happy betting, everyone. Go on Polymarket or Kalshi or one of these prediction markets today and start placing your bets. No, of course, I am not advocating that. In fact, I would say that if you are getting sucked into this online casino in which you're not just betting on the spinning of a ball on a roulette table, you are betting on literal life and death. Well, not only are you going to be the sucker, because you will always be the least informed person, unless you're involved in one of these plots, you will be the least informed person at the table and will be easily misled and will probably lose your money very quickly. But more to the point, you are participating in this activity that is literally incentivizing murder, mayhem, and bloodshed. And I don't know about you, I don't want any part of it. But as always, I'm interested in your information, your take on this. And as a result, I would like to call on the Corbett Report members to go to corbettreport.com/polymarket, where you will not only be able to find the complete hyperlinked transcript of everything I've talked about today, all of the links to all of the sources that we've looked at today, but also to participate in the comment section where you can deliberate with other informed Corbett reporteers about this information and about what Polymarket is, or Kalshi, or any of these online prediction markets, and how you think they are being used, abused, or misused. But on that note, I think we're going to leave today's exploration there for today. Thank you for investing your mind time in the Corbett Report. I am James Corbett of CorbettReport.com, looking forward to talking to you again in the near future.
The Deep State. False Flags. 9/11 Truth. The Federal Reserve. Secret Wars and Hidden Histories. Fake News. Medical Martial Law. Ceaseless Propaganda. James Corbett. Reportage. Essays on the New World Order. Available where books are sold. Until they're not.
Reportagebook.com